So this isn't a new complaint that I've had. Yes, I'm talking about the battery life on the iPhone, but I feel that the issue really stems from who is and isn't being blamed for the problems that we are experiencing. So, yes, I'm going to play this clip in a moment. I'll bring up an article from CNET in a moment, and they will speak on the problem of the iPhone's poor battery life. Consider subscribing. And then I'll pull some data to show that Apple is choosing to make this experience worse for the user. This is not an iOS versus Android debate. This is simply Apple makes choices, and those choices fatten their pockets while we are stuck being told, hey, have you considered these things? These things will potentially increase your battery life. So let's take a look at what these people are saying, and then let's take a look at what Apple has done, and then let's see if we can actually come together and improve the overall user experience. But before we get to that, a word. Did you have a hard time waking up this morning? If you did, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, like, and comment below. Hopefully today isn't Monday.
Change from previous updates. As long as you've got a couple hundred difference in score, it's going to behave basically the exact same. When it comes to battery life, well, my battery life hasn't been that great, actually. If we go into battery health, you'll see I'm at 99% with 168 cycles. And here's Coconut Battery if you want to see more details, but that's actually a Mac app you install outside the App Store. And this has been okay for me. The battery life, depending on the day, the first day of using it was absolutely terrible. I had to charge the phone at about 5 hours after installing the update. I could barely get through the day. So you'll see here, if we go back to Tuesday, I had 5 hours and 32 minutes of screen active time, 2 hours and 9 minutes of screen idle time, and that used 100% of the battery, and that's actually after it was plugged in. So I didn't get that much battery, at least at all. The other day, I had 2 hours and 29 minutes of screen active time and used 75% of my battery. Today, 3 hours and 3 minutes of screen active time, and I'm down to 47%. So it actually seems like it's getting better. Some people say it's phenomenal. For me, it's getting better over time, but it's just not great. Some people have said that if you turn off stolen device protection, it greatly improves battery on this update. Why that is, we don't really know, but it does seem to help. If you go into your settings, then Face ID and passcode, scroll down and you'll see stolen device protection. If you're having issues, try turning that off, see if it improves, then you can turn it back on. I would recommend leaving it on if you're in an area where you might have that issue, but if you're not, you may want to turn it off just to get some extra battery life and see if it helps. If you're wondering if you should install iOS.
So Aaron from Zolotech was saying his battery life wasn't that great. And I know that he just recently installed a beta version of some, iOS 17.5, something, blah, 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 blah. And yeah, with almost any operating system, when you install a new version of it, there might be, I'll just call them growing pains in terms of battery life not being as optimal as it should be because the phone is doing a lot of stuff in the background. But yeah, he flat out just said battery life was terrible. And if he just said it was, not great, then I would have been like, okay, but no, it was not good at all. So he suggested, based off of what he and other people are saying, is that turning off stolen device protection might increase battery life. You shouldn't have to do that. Like that's just a hard stop. You shouldn't have to turn off a feature on your $1,000 plus iPhone, or let's even just drop it down to $800 plus iPhone to improve your battery life. Here, C-Note is saying something similar. You want longer iPhone battery life? Turn off these two iOS settings. So the first one is remove widgets from your iPhone lock screen. It took iPhone forever to get widgets. And now it appears that, people's battery lives aren't as great as they could be because the widgets. So let's turn off those widgets. Let's remove them. Let's get rid of something that Apple took however many versions of iOS to finally bring to the iPhone. Turn them off because your battery life sucks. The next thing, turn off your iPhone's haptic keyboard feedback. Another thing that took forever to come to the iPhone, which I will say this to give Apple credit, not for how long it took for them to bring it to the iPhone, but because the haptic feedback on the phone is so good, I would hate for somebody to have to turn off this feature. On most of my Android devices, yeah, I turn it off. I'm like, yeah, the vibration motor or whatever they call it isn't that good, so I'm going to leave it off. But on the iPhone, I keep it on because I like how it feels. As of right now, I think the only other device that I choose to keep it on is a Samsung Galaxy S20 whatever, because yeah, Samsung has decided to put some money into their haptic engines or motors or whatever to make it feel good. But I feel that it's unfortunate that here are people with millions of subscribers, we'll call them that just collectively, that instead of looking at the actual culprit, they're now saying, hey, user, make these changes on your flagship level phone, turn off these features so that way the battery life can be improved. And I think that's unfortunate. If these were budget $150 phones, I'd be like, you know what? Yeah, you win some and you lose some. And for the price you paid, you should expect to have to make some compromises. But for any of these phones, an iPhone that is not the iPhone SE, but any other iPhone is a flagship level device, and battery life should not suffer. So as I've been sitting here ranting, who should we blame? If I haven't already said it, which I don't think I have. But we should not be blaming the user. I do blame these people for not pointing the finger at the correct people. All right, so had to make a quick change to make it a little more legible for people who might be looking at this on the small screen. But what I wanted to show here are the battery capacities for all iPhone models, not including the minis or the SEs, for the last several years. So going back to the XS Max and then all of the non-Max versions, we can see what Apple has put in their devices. Now, before we analyze this chart, if you go to Apple's website, I don't think you see any of these numbers. I pulled all of this information from GSM Arena. I imagine that, yeah, when they get the phone, somebody opens it and they say, oh, look, the battery capacity is printed on the battery. So, yeah, some companies choose to put this information directly on their website, but Apple is notorious for trying to put a curtain around a bunch of stuff and just telling the user, hey, here you go, you'll use it. But let's start with the XS Max. 6.5-inch screen, and there's the battery capacity. So for that year, you kind of really don't have much to reference, and I didn't want to go back to the Plus versions of the phone because I just didn't think that was really worth the time. But coming up from the XS Max to the 11 Pro Max, we can see a 25% increase in battery capacity, and that is great. Those types of increases are phenomenal. So kudos to Apple back then. But just the very next year, going from the 11 Pro Max to the 12 Pro Max, we got a decrease in battery capacity, roughly an 8% decrease in battery capacity. And that's terrible. And it's even more interesting that the phone itself got bigger, but the battery size went down. So I don't understand what happened there. And if you were to briefly look, you can see that for all the phones, going from the 11 variant to the 12 variant, the battery capacity actually went down. And if I am recalling correctly, because I had a 12 mini, which isn't displayed here because it's just a smaller phone, the phones got a little more boxier, which theoretically could have meant that a higher capacity battery could have been placed in there. And I say capacity, and I just mean just a physically bigger battery could have been placed in there too. Because as I said, going from the 11 Pro Max to the 12 Pro Max, the phone got a bigger screen. And then also going from the 11 Pro to the 12 Pro, phone got a bigger screen. But for some reason, Apple decided to put a smaller battery in it. All right. Going to the 11 Pro Max from the 12 Pro Max, we see an 18% increase in battery capacity, which is good. But, some of that was kind of negated by the previous year's 8% decrease. So it kind of sucks that, 18%. Well, that's really kind of a 10% from what it was. So whatever. And I don't even know if my math was right on that one. But yes, fine. It got a little bit better. Cool. But then the next year, we saw a 1% decrease in the overall size or the overall capacity. And the next 2 years, we see small incremental upgrades. And if you look at the rest of this chart, that's pretty much what you see. Some decreases in size, and then for the ones that are actually increases in battery size, most of them really aren't that large, which I need to preface that, yes, every year you can't have a 25% increase in battery capacity. Like, yeah, you just can't do that. I know that. But to decrease the battery capacity, I just don't see why you did that, especially for those years where the phone physically got bigger. Makes no sense. Now, one thing that I wanted to point out, because, the plus is on the screen and you can, pause the video and see, whatever is there. But one of two things I want to point out is, one, the 16 phones aren't out. So this is all what leakers are claiming. So get that out of the way. But two, for the people who don't have ginormous hands or don't want ginormous phones, you have the regular iPhone and then you have the Pro version. And starting with the 12 Pro, the screen sizes were the same. So the footprint was relatively similar. And for that year, the battery on the Pro and the non-Pro device were the same. Unfortunately for both of them, it was a decrease in battery capacity from the prior year. But, that year they were the same. But from the years following, you can see that the battery in the Pro device is smaller than the battery in the non-Pro device. Doesn't make sense. It just flat out doesn't. There was nothing you could say to, the battery is smaller because of the internals and the phone that's the Pro device is more efficient, so therefore it doesn't require the same capacity of battery. And the bullshit. That's all that it is. Because even if you were to say that, then I'd say, well, why isn't that logic being held to the Pro Max and the Plus version? And it just flat out isn't. So it's just a bunch of BS. Another way for Apple to squeeze pennies on their end, but then continue to charge you and me and everybody else a premium. So for Zollotech and for CNET to point the finger at, hey, user, you want the problem. However, you can make these changes to potentially improve the battery life on your phone. I don't understand why they aren't equally saying, well, the capacity in the phone just isn't that great. So maybe the device manufacturer should put a higher capacity battery in their device. And for a company that's worth around, if not more than $3 trillion, have probably some of the most brilliant engineers working for them, there's no excuse. Absolutely zero excuse. Now, I'm no expert, and I'm sure you're no expert, but all I can do, yes, now at this point, is draw comparisons to the competition. And as I said earlier, this is not an iOS versus Android debate. We're just talking about the device manufacturers, the actual hardware vendors. They are the ones that decide, the battery in this phone is going to be this capacity. So on the screen, we have a variety of devices. Now, in the middle, we have the Zenfone 10, which has a 5.9-inch screen, which was released back in 2023, so it's a year old. But for 5.9 inches, we get a battery capacity of 4,300 milliamp hours. So we're rivaling the battery capacity of the Pro Max. So tiny, tiny screen in comparison to the Pro Max device. But battery capacity is similar. I mean, going back to the 13 Pro, 14 Pro Max, and yeah, by the time we get to the 15 Pro Max, I mean, there's a small difference, but not much, especially when you look at the actual form factors of the device. So yeah, no excuse for Apple to be skimping on the battery. Now, I wanted to also show, what are some of the capacities for devices that are actually similar in size to what Apple is offering? So we have the Motorola Moto G7 Power, which came out back in 2019, so 5 years ago. 6.2 inches, has a battery capacity of 5,000 milliamp hours. So there it is. 5,000 is greater than anything that Apple's offering right now, and it's a budget device. And for anybody who's going to pull up the notion, which it's somewhat valid, that, well, these device manufacturers have to pick and choose, and some companies add these features while other companies add these other features. Yes, I understand that. Completely understand that. But when we start talking about flagship level devices, which all of the iPhones that are listed on this page are flagship devices, skimping is something that should be kept to a minimum. And battery capacity definitely shouldn't be one of them. So 5,000 milliamp hours in the Moto G7 Power from 5 years ago. Now, I was curious to see, like, well, what are some of the companies that really push the limit? And as I said before, I know you can't have 25% increases in battery capacity every year, blah, 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 which, whatever. But I just said, okay, let's look at something else that is similar in size to this Pro Max or to the Plus. And we have the ROG Phone 7 Ultimate. I will be completely truthful in saying that there is an ROG Phone 8, which came out this year or the end of last year or something, that is technically smaller and the battery size is a little smaller. So I didn't use that one on purpose. So I'm not trying to mislead, but wanted to show that 6,000 milliamp hours is possible. And I'm not even saying that's the limit, because I honestly don't know. But for a phone that somebody could go out and buy today, you can get a phone that has a battery capacity of 6,000 milliamp hours. Now, I don't want a phone that big, but could you imagine if your Pro Max or your Plus had a 6,000 milliamp hour battery? The phone wouldn't die. I mean, yes, I'm however many minutes into this video, and I haven't brought out the fact that, well, when you have a device manufacturer that also makes the operating system, the harmony between the hardware and the software, and the efficiencies that come along with that, blah, blah, blah. Yes, all of that can be true. But that doesn't mean that the battery life has to suck because the device manufacturer decided to put a small battery in it. So combine all of those efficiencies with a battery capacity like 5,000 or 6,000. Then, yeah, you'll have a phone that is truly amazing. And I won't sit here and waste everybody's time making this video. But Apple, my gosh, they do it time and time again. They'll paint a picture of all these other things that they deem as great, but they always miss on the small stuff, the stuff that should be a no-brainer. Hey, dude, what's the one thing that all these devices have in common? And I say the one thing, but I'll say, what is one thing that these devices all have in common? They all have batteries. How about you put the big one in your phone instead of having these other companies do it? So I'm going to close there. As I said, this is not an iOS versus Android video. This is regardless of what operating system is running on the device. Look at the capacity of the battery. Why are they so small in the iPhone? Why is the battery in the regular Pro smaller than the battery in the regular iPhone? And for the people who have millions of subscribers or followers or whatever, why are you pointing the finger at the consumer? Hey, consumer, you make these changes, instead of pointing the finger at the device manufacturer. I kind of feel the same way about plastics, that we have these companies that make these plastics that we all use. Like right now, I'm looking at a bunch of plastic, but instead of them being held accountable for how we recycle or reuse this stuff, it's no, consumer. Now that you bought it, you figure out what to do with it. You're responsible for recycling. These products have life cycles, and the company that created it should be responsible for, or I'll say at least semi-responsible for, how it's disposed of properly. And just random commercials or doing whatever, it clearly isn't enough. So again, last thing I'll say, why is the battery so small in these flagship level iPhones? And why aren't these people with millions of subscribers just looking at the numbers? Point the finger at Apple. Don't tell the consumer to turn off features on their flagship level devices to conserve some of the battery life.